Okay, we're at our next appointment, so I'm going to step away from my husband for a minute in order to speak about this subject because of the sensitivity of it, and I could only speak to it from a caregiver position. I can't speak to it from a survivor position. But we wanted to speak about grief and the 5 stages of grief, and understanding not only the 5 stages of grief, but getting out of that cycle of staying in those 5 stages and not knowing when you need to open that door and move on from those 5 stages. And nobody's time is the same. Nobody's way that they go through the 5 stages are the same. And there's also ambiguous grief, right? That as far as us caregivers and all the caregivers that are having to deal with these survivors, we're kind of grieving them, but they're still alive. So how do you manage your days with looking at your loved one and knowing they're there physically, they look the same, they sometimes sound the same, but we know they're not the same. So how is it that you deal with that grief? The easiest part is the anger, right? To be angry. Then you kind of get over that, kind of get numb to the feeling. That doesn't mean that part is not going to come back, because the 5 stages of grief does not just say you're going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're going to be done with it. Denial might be your best friend, because denial is easiest to be able to still stay with blinders on and not really deal with the reality. Now, that's not the healthiest, but again, everybody's process is different. It's just not staying in that place, okay? For me personally, me and my husband wasn't even together when his accident happened. We were in a really messed up place with each other. And so when I had to deal with my husband now having a brain injury and stepping up to the plate, because legally I am still his wife, and whether we were together or not, I knew what I married for. So for me, I was coming at it from a totally different aspect that I'm sure a lot of other wives may be in this situation for. So my reality hit me real quick. The grieving, I don't know necessarily if I went through anger or if I went through the what ifs. No, I did go through the what ifs. But there wasn't for me to blame anybody. And yes, prayer works, but it wasn't changing the situation. It wasn't changing what my reality was. So what I needed to do for myself was be real and say, hey, we're both new to this life. This is going to be a process. I don't know what to expect if my husband even wakes up from the coma. And then when he woke up, I don't know what to expect now, going from this unit to now the next unit. And what do I do for my husband? How do I support him on this road? How do I educate myself? Because the hospitals or the healthcare industry, they don't really prepare you. They don't prepare you for going home. They don't prepare you for all the emotions you're going to go through when you go home. Okay, because not necessarily does every husband be able to go home with his wife. Not every wife stays at the hospitals 24/7 with their husbands. Not every wife is the primary caregiver. And everybody has to do what works for their situation and for their own survival method, because in this life it is survival, right? You have to just figure out how to survive, how to make each day better, because we don't know what the next minute holds. We don't know, as the caregiver, what might trigger the survivor at any given moment. If it's while you're driving to the next appointment, and we don't really get to have a fair amount of time to really understand our emotions, because we are constantly busy with our survivor and constantly just trying to figure out the next thing and the next fight and what's the next battle that we have to go through. So the stages of grief gets pushed a lot, and they get confused in a lot of other different emotions that are there. But I will say, in losing other family members, that grief is a completely different grief than when your survivor is still walking around, when your survivor is still breathing. That grief is completely different, because like I tell you guys in the conversations, you can't say, well, do you remember when? Or, well, you used to be. And it's a human nature to always go back to the happiest moments or go back to the most memorable times. And unfortunately, our survivors don't always remember all these times and share these memories with us anymore. So you grieve that too. You grieve that what is the word that I'm looking for? You grieve that connection with your spouse again. You grieve that they don't look at you the same. They don't speak to you the same. You have to do way more for them. The one thing is that we have to remember, though, is not to throw that into their face, right? Us as a spouse, I don't know if everybody did this prior to getting married, but it's one thing for future people to know. When you get married, really know what marriage means to you. Know what your foundation is. What's the important things to you? What to do if there's a life-changing event? What does one want over the other? Who do they want to take care of them? What are their methods that they're looking for? Are they okay with pharmaceuticals? Would they rather a more natural way of going about healing? There's so many things that have to be taken into consideration. And because I already had so many years with my husband together, split apart, living two different lives, living the same lives throughout the years, his soul is what kept me loving him. So even through this hardship and through this challenge and through this new life, I came into it making a decision that I was going to love my husband back to health. And no matter where he and I was at that moment, him being alive and him being here was bigger than him and I. And